It's the second. To see comments. Some comments.
Has everyone had a chance to read over all the minutes? I know there are a lot, sorry.
You do a good job with the minutes.
Really
You
good.
know, this,
It looks good to me, Daphne. Would you like a motion to approve?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
I'll make that motion.
This is Kate. Go ahead, Kevin.
No, go ahead.
I'll second.
Okay, great. Any other?
I just wanted to make the comment that the February 3rd seems like a long time ago, and I don't remember saying some of the things I did, but that's that's not. We can
It's
work
good.
with this. So yeah. So
It's good that somebody documented it, isn't it?
exactly.
Yeah. Okay, well, now that we've gone over the minutes, I think the main reason we're here again is because Plan Commission met on March 22nd, and they had a lot of good comments on the plan. And then in the end, they, instead of approving it, they wanted to refer it back to this group to get a formal approval and kind of discuss some of the points that Plan Commission had made. So I'm not sure if any of you had time to, review that other meeting, but basically a big portion of it was Commissioner Paulson, right off the bat said, we need to calm the traffic. This is a highly congested area. We need to, and his point was, not to plan for traffic because traffic will kind of come. And the way I've always heard it is traffic is kind of like a gas, like however much space you give it, it just kind of expands to that space. So he would like to see like limited parking and slowing traffic, reducing speeds and all of that stuff. And then he ultimately wanted us to reduce the lanes from two lanes on each direction to one lane, stuff like that. So we would just like to hear some of your thoughts on those issues as well. And then towards the end, they also mentioned, the unsignalized crossings were a big issue, similar to what Jeff had mentioned in our last meeting. Those RFBs, if people don't stop, and that was also a big concern. And then we actually never got to this portion, but Randy had also mentioned a lot of things he wanted changed in the design guidelines, just like, changing some things here or there on how the design guidelines should go for University Avenue. So we're kind of looking at more of an open discussion today on some of your thoughts, what you would like to see changed or not changed, and then hopefully at the end of this getting either a formal approval or some kind of motion to move the plan along.
And Daphne, I'll jump in just because I was at that plan commission meeting as well. And I was when Kurt had started discussing his concerns about the plan and how it was maybe more auto-centric than what he would have liked to have seen. I think his suggestion of looking at the University Avenue corridor being one lane in each direction plus maybe a center lane for bus rapid transit or other modes. As a long-term goal, I think that's actually a pretty good idea. But to me, that seems like something that's pretty far off, and that incorporating some of some language to that effect as a longer term goal. And it kind of ties into what Jeff was talking about earlier. The roads are going to function quite a bit differently in the future than they do now. So I think that to me would make some sense.
Yeah, Daphne, if I could jump in.
Yeah.
From the perspective that we had too, and I've been saying this throughout the duration of the whole planning effort, is, this group was tasked in response to an RFP to, look at multimodal options along the university corridor, improving what we can kind of control now, right? And understanding that for the ultimate vision of University Avenue to be realized, this single plan isn't going to be that, right? It's going to be the first step. Identifying some of the recommendations that might get us, remember, 10 to 20 years was our time plan horizon. And, whereas, holistically changing this plan is a bigger effort, but remembering too that, with the input of this group, of our survey and our citizens, we don't want to, I guess, we didn't want to prioritize any of the recommendations that this absolutely has to happen before this. It gives the city options to be able to, be flexible in their approach up until that time, where again, a larger study or the next studies or one of these recommendations is kind of the spin-off of what we recommended here. So, when Kurt brought that up, I also agreed with it. But, when he said right off the bat that he probably would not approve this plan as it is written, it did bring up some concern because, it was nothing that we had heard over the 9 months of this entirety of this project. So I would just ask this group to kind of think through that holistically too, and just say, we are still taking interim steps into the next step. And if that is more spin-off studies, implementing some of our recommendations, or deciding that we're gonna, essentially adopt this plan. Maybe it's only good for 5 years, but then in 5 years, we're gonna really take a major approach to changing what University Avenue could look like. Just to think through that a little bit. So.
Didn't Madison do this with Odana Road?
Yes. Yeah. they
Narrow
did.
it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I
And-
think that was, oh, go ahead, Jim.
From the few people I've spoken with about it, they like that much better. And I'm wondering if our recommendation here is, okay, this is with the existing University Avenue being 4-lane, this is what we can recommend. But there possibly should be a study done to say, okay, if we want to implement these changes using a 4-lane highway, there should be a study done, okay, what's the cost of that versus what are the implications of changing it back to a 2-lane?
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think, Mitch, I'm going to put you on the spot here. You and I discussed this morning about the Madison investment, right? And just connecting this whole corridor, throughout the whole thing. It's bigger than just University Avenue when it's a principal arterial roadway. It would cause me some big concerns. I think what, business owners might think if we narrowed this down and all of a sudden the traffic was cut in half, I think you'd be dealing with a different issue for business owners and the public, and then the rerouting of traffic. So, but Mitch, maybe I can put you on the spot about saying it better than what I probably could about Madison.
Yeah, so I think, and Randy and Paul have already kind of said this. I think, the idea of taking the, our metro area, Madison, Middleton metro area, and transitioning away from an auto-centric model to more of a human scale city is a very valid idea. The problem is that needs to be modeled through the larger planning that we do in the metro area. Our concern is if you take University Avenue and limit its capacity and slow down the traffic, it'll just push the traffic other locations, both within Middleton, but also around the Beltway and into corridors in Madison. With some of the work that Madison's done in mind, they spent money building the University Avenue kind of I don't know exactly what they call it, but their overpass throughway that was intended specifically just to take traffic from this portion of University Avenue and travel it into downtown Madison. And so, from my perspective, this needs to happen. If this is something that the larger metro area wants to do, it needs to happen at a larger scale than the University Avenue plan. The plan itself was developed under some of the stipulations that were already identified within the Middleton Comprehensive Plan, which has identified University Avenue as a major 4-lane arterial that isn't conducive to a road diet. And so those are kind of the assumptions that were made when the plan was developed. And I think that's kind of the perspective or what needs to be kind of remembered as we kind of move through this final edits and final adoption stage, is that from our perspective, it is consistent with what the Middleton Comprehensive Plan, which was adopted in 2021, I believe, has already kind of stipulated for the corridor itself.
What do you guys think about trying to strike a balance between what Kurt's suggestion is and where the plan stands now by giving us some language that talks about the future and the ability maybe to study putting University Avenue on a road diet.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. You know, a good thing to do, Randy, is right up front and say, this is the first of, you know, potential many studies, or, you know, definitely not the be all end all study. Some of the observations that we've heard and some of the things that we've heard, we could probably put that into a pretty concise text up front that basically says what we're trying to do here is, again, a 10 to 20 year time horizon. We kind of understanding the existing conditions, and from as a starting point of the Middleton Comprehensive Plan, understanding that technology in the world is changing around us very quickly. It could be 5 years, it could be 25 years before some of the things Jeff brought up before the call happen. But we're thinking about them. We're ready to address them, and they might, you know, are considered, but need to be, you know, obviously more study needs to happen at that appropriate time. I think that would make some logical sense to do that.
I was just gonna make the exact same suggestion, Randy, that it at least be addressed in the language. I know with the road diet, my understanding is that those streets that are good candidates for that are streets that carry 12,000 ADT or less. And this street's over 20,000 ADT. So it's probably not a good candidate for road diet now. We actually are looking at doing a study possibly next year for putting Century Avenue on a road diet west of Frank Lloyd Wright. And that might be a good candidate. We've talked with the county about that, but I would like to at least see the language, and using some of the points that Kurt made very eloquently during the Plan Commission meeting about how this is a barrier for pedestrians, and it's not right now, you know, isn't the right time. We just redid the whole street, and the cross section was kind of selected and solidified because that's a, you know, going to last 20 years into the future, but at least putting some language in there about future exploration of the idea.
Yeah, I think so. And certainly if we were able to narrow that, the lanes, we could gain back some terrace width, and there'd be a lot of positives to it if we could get it accomplished.
I got a question on the BRT. If that were to come down University Avenue, would it be better to have the 2 lanes or the 4 lanes, or is one better than the other? To get, because what I'm seeing is the BRT would go down the center, is that correct? That's where the stations would be, and people would have to get to the middle of the highway. And would that be something that we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know when or if or however this could happen, just like with driverless cars or whatever, that if that could be part of the statement too, that could maybe change the mix of what the 2 lane or 4 lane looks like when the BRT comes into effect.
Yeah, I agree. I think if we get a BRT, or even just much more regular bus service, even more regular bus service, and it becomes more of a mass transit line, I think then the ability to go from 4 lanes to 2 lanes gets better. You know, it's easier.
Yeah, and I think, Kathy, what you meant is like the right of way stays, you know, the same, you know, right? Like the road width right now would stay the same. It's just like the 2 middle lanes or something would be, you know, dedicated BRT, and then there's only 2, something like that. Yeah. But
like we said, we don't know when, if, how, right. You know, so, and I think we want to, what we're working on now is like, we have to work with what we have and look to how to improve, make the best improvements we can.
I agree. And we got there's a lot of change that's going to happen to University Avenue over the next 5 years. Hopefully the plan helps guide some of that.
I like that exact wordage that you just said, Kathy, in the front. It's just like, we have to look at what we have right now, you know, and this kind of sets the tone for what we're writing about and the recommendations that are upon us, but then still coming kind of tying that back together about but we're not looking in a vacuum here. This isn't a shelf plan. This is something that's going to evolve into other things, hopefully recommendations in this plan. we could get through 1 or 24 of those or 21 of these recommendations, somewhere in between, and pivot into, spin-off studies, larger metro studies, MPO studies or something of similar. So yeah, I like the line though, look at what we have, as stating that right early.
Yeah.
Tying that in.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I
John.
think that was some on the plan commission too, as John Schaefer, Randy, was that right? He was kind of like, this is what we have, right now too. He mentioned that. So,
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think as Abby had mentioned, that there's been a significant investment in the right of way and the 4 lanes recently. So it seems like we have to be cognizant of that as well.
those improvements they should last 20 years, right? If nothing else changes, is that, or how often would we look to redo University Avenue? I'm not in public works, I don't know.
It is blacktop now instead of concrete, which will make a shorter lifespan. And
Okay,
I'm not an engineer, but the last one was done in '86 and replaced, 3 years ago?
Yeah.
Mhm.
But that was concrete. So,
Yep.
one of the things that we haven't talked about is with as fast as Middleton's growing and all of the housing that we're building and the limit of east to west streets, and then to slow down University Avenue, does that really work with what you're doing? I mean, it's one of the main roads. And look at all of the new housing that we have. Holy cow.
Yeah.
And those people are geared towards cars. They're not geared towards mass transportation, I don't think. So how do you put on that much more and then take away? I don't quite understand what you're thinking.
Well, I think, Jeff, I think one of the things that we talk about University Avenue becoming a transit-oriented development zone, so that hopefully we get enough people living along University Avenue that the bus system, mass transit, becomes very convenient, and so we're pulling them out of the cars and putting them on the buses. I mean, that's a goal, but it's amazing to me that we only have 4% of the people using the bus system right now.
Right. Oh, it's
Yeah.
small.
To that point though, Randy, too, University Avenue is a thoroughfare for regional traffic. So it's not just the people living on it, right? And so it's like, that works. And I agree with increasing density and that, making it transit centric, but I think that happens over time, because then you got to, like you said, Jeff, the city is going to have to consider what are our east-west thoroughfares through the community. We got to have something. And obviously your access to the Beltline and all the investment that Madison has put in east of you, and they're dependent on your segment being a principal arterial. And that's always been their understanding and their investments as well. If that was to change, I think that would spin off into a really, dedicated, focused transportation study, and needing to also look at the whole city of Middleton and about, okay, if not University, then where? Because traffic will just be on the local streets then, and that may or may
That would
not
be
work
worse.
real well, and it's going to cost
thanks.
more and make your neighbors mad, and probably make your University Avenue businesses going, hey, wait, I located here because of the traffic. And
Right.
there's a lot of spin-off coming out of that, but
What
for the
they
most.
want to do too is, move it out to the Beltline. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I don't like going down the Beltline anymore. It's turned into a death trap. And now we want to put more down it? Really? How much can that really handle? Just up there.
I agree, Jeff.
So, this went on in Stonefield too. On Stonefield Road, when it was built, was a real quiet, nice neighborhood. Now that's a thoroughfare, Stonefield Road is. I don't think the people there like that much, but that's what's happened.
Yeah, and they really got a big taste of it when Park Street was under construction a couple of years ago, and everyone rerouted through Stonefield, which
Yeah.
made it even worse. And you know, they didn't like it at all,
Right.
which is what we on Park Street deal with every day. But I think if we don't give the commuters a main route, it's just going to be a problem. So I'm in agreement with all of this stuff that's being said.
Yeah.
Paul, what is your takeaway on the other main area of discussion at the Plan Commission was the unsignalized crosswalks? What is your takeaway on that?
As far as them being what, removed or prioritized, or
Yeah,
I guess.
right. I think there was some, you know, I think there's a few people in Plan Commission that felt like we shouldn't be suggesting crosswalks at those locations without a signal.
Okay, so, right. Okay, so just for what we're talking about here for the entire group is there are 5 signalized intersections and currently 7 unsignalized mid-block crossings across University Avenue. And, you know, there's guidance involved about how pedestrians take the path of least resistance and, you know, dart out into traffic, and how the crosswalks should look to be spaced about 600 feet apart. And that hits guidance. We have proper crosswalk spacing throughout the entire corridor with the exception of the east end of the corridor, Allen Boulevard, and kind of that new development going up 1,200 feet west of Allen Boulevard is the next crosswalk. So the only additional crosswalk unsignalized that we would have recommended is something in the middle across from the apartments there. I believe that's, gosh, Philbin, right? Is that the Philbin?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that we had asked, or we had recommended an additional crosswalk there. Now the Plan Commission talked about, hey, you know, just crossing that many lanes of traffic, 5, you know, with a two-way left turn lane in the middle, can be problematic if there's not a median. Do we just want to make them at signalized intersections? It's kind of a catch-22 because you would be then not meeting spacing guidelines. And then the other part of it, of the concern of the Planning Commission was, okay, if I'm going through a signalized intersection and I'm the traveling public, maybe a regional commuter, I don't realize that there's a crosswalk there. There's no signage or whatever. So is that a safety issue? And, you know, we had come up with some potential ways to alert the traveling public that these are some, you know, in some cases might be, you know, whether it's a flashing beacon or whether there's signage or other things like that. But in my opinion, Randy, to answer that question, long-winded here, is I think we responded to the spacing question number 1 and felt that the city met that requirement, and it's okay to have signalized and unsignalized in the areas that we don't know pedestrian counts. And so maybe that's the next step, is to recommend pedestrian counts. And I think we did that, is to say, do we need additional signage or other things in unsignalized locations to better alert the traveling public? Without making that recommendation, without having those numbers in front of us, might be a little premature. But I think, you know, unsignalized crosswalks do work. The other thing you do run into, though, is just if you don't have them, you know, the spacing is more than a quarter mile apart, people are just going to take the path of least resistance and just cross, not in a crosswalk at all, in a dedicated, safe way.
Don't
Long-winded, sorry.
RFPs though work a lot better on 1-lane roads versus 4-lane roads? You know what I mean? I mean, an RFP on a 4-lane like that, I mean, that's almost like Russian roulette, really. 1 lane, like on Park Street, works good. I did have an instance a few days back, the RFB at Parmenter by the roundabout. I'm driving through the roundabout onto Parmenter. Gentleman hits the crosswalk, hits the button, walks out in front. I'm in the intersection and he walks right in front of me. And then he gives me the finger. You got to give a person time to stop, for goodness sakes. I mean, I was in it, using it, but he feels that he's the pedestrian, so he has the right of way. Well, I've never
Yeah.
seen one beat a car yet, so I'd be careful with that idea.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and I mean, I think in the ideal situation, it's probably every city block, right? Where you would have a crosswalk. You do on the west side, west of Park Street. For the most part, you have crosswalks at every single one, Bristol, Middleton Street, Park Lawn Park. And then you get into different spacings as you kind of go in towards that commercial corridor. And then you just got to look at generation, right? So where's the transit stops? Where are the apartment buildings? Where are the destinations that people are looking to go? And if let's just say that, Middleton Sport Bowl and Willie Street was down on the western end of the corridor, and you had the apartment buildings and you had transit there. Yeah, I think you definitely, because people are going to want to go across the street to shop and to use those destinations for restaurants or whatever. As that looks in, I think we do want to explore mid-block options, at least where there isn't spacing. Mayflower, yeah, I think you need something there because of what you have around that area and where people might go reside and recreate or shop at. Down on the east end of the corridor, as of today, maybe not, but as that develops, I definitely would think you would want something there as well. But that was a point of emphasis for the Plan Commission too. And a safety thing is like, hey, what about our residents who are crossing the streets in non-signalized intersections? How are they ever going to know, right? And what do we need to do? And you can have that through investment of some treatments, or you could have signage. I don't think we exactly know yet, and I think it's up for the city to explore. We gave some options in the plans, about 5 or 6, 7 at each intersection of what, how we might prioritize and what we would do and what that investment would cost. Randy, does that answer your question at all?
I think so. I think what you're saying is you think that the plan still, as it's written, still kind of, you'd want to keep the same recommendations and same language.
I do think so. Again, kind of building off look at what we have, Kathy. I don't think we want to, I don't think there's a point to suggest removal at any point. I think it's just to better identify and maybe make it safer in a couple areas. Would be my initial blush at it without, not knowing the pedestrian numbers there.
I don't know how specific we want to get, but what about where we do have signal crosswalks? What about adding audio to that? Do you see that quite frequently in larger cities? Either it'll just be a beep to alert the pedestrian that it's safe to cross, or it could be specific as Cross University or Cross Park Street. And this would be more safety for pedestrians who may have visual problems.
Jim, that's a great idea. I can tell that's
We have
really good.
that at Branch and Century.
Oh, we do?
Yeah, we do.
I'll have to go check that out.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It'll say wait, and then it'll say proceed
Continually.
carefully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
But
some will be as specific as which direction you should cross or which street you should cross. Others are just the wait, or some are just a beeping signal.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. I would also love to see the blinking pedestrian crossing sign be bigger for drivers. Because I do live on Park Street. Someone mentioned at the last meeting that oftentimes you wait for 4 and 5 cars to go by before you actually get someone to stop, even though the light's
Mhm.
blinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we talked about that being a concern too, right? If one lane of traffic is stopping, but then the pedestrian thinks they're good to go, it's always a two-way street as far as, you know, the pedestrian still has to make sure that they're following. Unfortunately, they shouldn't have to, but unless enforcement isn't right there to watch it happen and issue tickets, you're taking your own life in your hands. Jeff, I think you brought it up before. It's Russian roulette out there sometimes crossing that street. And what you think you got off one lane and you got that queued up, that doesn't mean the car in lane 2 is doing the same thing, and that makes it challenging. So, I mean, yeah, we could certainly on page 38 add another element into here about either, you know, additional blinking signs or audio. You know, and on page 38 of the report, we talked about some specific infrastructure options, high visibility crosswalks, hardened center lines, all this, but we could certainly add to this one as well, and provide some applicable locations where this might be best implemented.
Yeah, and I think this could also even, I mean, if we want, you know, University Avenue to be more pedestrian focused, I've seen a lot of other cities, like they'll put like big like art projects around crosswalks, or like make the crosswalks, you know, more interesting with art projects. So like it does also kind of slow people down, because they'll be wanting to like look at what's on the street. And so that's also an opportunity, I think, at some of these crosswalks. And I think at Plan Commission too, I think it was Commissioner Urban Herman said, you know, like the one on Gammon by Memorial High School, that one's like twice as wide as a normal one. You know, there's like a lot more, you know, going on there because it's right by the high school. But, you know, having a wider crosswalk so people like know, like, oh, this is a bigger crossing, you know, there's more people going around there. Could also be another kind of like treatment, what Paul was saying, to help, you know, these kind of unsignalized things go along.
Speaking as someone on the arts committee, I love that idea, Daphne. We want more art on the corridor anyway.
Right.
So Daphne, I think one of the, right in advance of the meeting, Randy put out a really nice, you know, report, and I think we all got a copy of that, and SRF kind of responded to that. We kind of went into the Plan Commission meeting. We had a recommendation from city staff, and, you know, kind of went into that with maybe more discussion on those items. Probably still need to be, you know, a recommendation contingent on some of the things Randy pointed out and Abby and you and city staff had responded to. So I don't want to push this along, but I do think this is a very important piece of this meeting here, is to kind of understand from this committee's perspective of what do we like, if all of it, where do we want to see it added? And does this satisfy the committee? Do we need to see more? Do we not agree on some of these things? I think this would be a good use of our time to go through much of this as well, unless somebody else has other items that they'd like to add.
Yeah, so can you guys all see the screen? This was what we had kind of added into the Plan Commission packet in March. And this was kind of in response to Randy had a lot of good responses to the design guidelines, which are further down about like setbacks, parking, all of that. And so this is what we had kind of recommended, and then Plan Commission didn't even, you know, touch on that subject yet, because, you know, they were talking about the 2-lane versus 4-lane, stuff like that. So if you guys haven't had a chance to look it over, I can also give you guys some time to look at that as well.
Jeff has his hand raised.
Oh, that's old.
Oh yeah, Jeff, you have to lower your hand also once you
I see that.
raise that. Yeah.
Thanks, Abby.
Yeah, and maybe as you're kind of going through this a little bit too, I think, when Randy brought these in front of Daphne and myself, Mitch and Abby, we had kind of asked too for, getting some more guidance for, is the city comfortable with adding these things in?
Mhm.
Maybe I'll put Abby on the spot here. Generally in agreement with a lot of Randy's comments here, if not all of them, as ways to enhance the plan and provide just a little bit more description and guidance. Again, the funny part about it is we never got to this as part of the plan commission. So I think, in my opinion, and I think already in the city's, my opinion and Mitch, is that these would be great things to add. And and it's just a matter of then, is it enough to adopt to recommend adoption, or are there other things to add to it? Or are there pieces on here that we need to talk about? For instance, the amount of glass or the percentages or anything like that, and then just make a formal recommendation with this group that we're comfortable with the materials we have in the plan, as amended by obviously this document.
So some of the, these comments are, I generated just based on my dealing with other design guidelines in Madison or other communities, what I thought would be, reasonable or appropriate. The ground floor transparency is, actually all these guidelines are recommendations. Is that correct, Daphne and Abby? They're not requirements. They're all recommendations.
Yeah, that's correct.
So, what I was trying to get to is have the plan become more of a orient towards more of an urban type street rather than strip commercial. So, looking for more glass on the first floors, trying to get the parking around the sides, around the back, limiting the amount of parking in front. And then there's just a few things in the materials that I thought, University Avenue is probably maybe not the best place for vinyl siding and IFAS. So that's why I had made those suggestions. The other one is maybe one worth discussing is the minimum building height. I am uncomfortable with us having one-story buildings go back into University Avenue. It seems like this is a corridor we really need to encourage the density. I don't, 2 stories seems like a bare minimum for that corridor at this point.
I have 2 questions, and one of them has to do with the item number 2 under the building heights. What does that mean? It's stepped back towards the single family properties.
I actually, what I was trying to get at was, if there's some single family properties that are going to be backing up to University Avenue redevelopment projects, and do we want to have 4 or 5 story buildings come right up to somebody's backyard?
No.
so maybe they need to be stepped down,
Or stepped away from the single family homes.
Yeah. Paul and Daphne, maybe the language isn't quite right. I understand the intent, but maybe.
Okay. And then Randy, you'd also talked about including some basic design guidelines. Is this what the kind of how basic of the design guidelines you're looking at? Is the first floor glass and the materials? Okay.
Paul and his group's got Appendix B in this the University Avenue corridor plan that is the design guidelines.
Okay.
And so when I looked at the appendix, basically that's when I, added some adjustments to it. There isn't, the design guidelines are pretty loose, really. I mean, it's not very restrictive. It could be quite a bit more restrictive, but I think it's quite loose, quite open-ended. In my opinion, it's not all that prescriptive at all.
And this is, you're talking about this building heights east of Park Street.
I think these
Yeah.
are mostly just towards like
Yes.
commercial, multifamily.
Yes, yes, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Because you look at the single family, this would be non-single family. It would be the mixed use
Right.
areas. Yeah, good point.
But it could be for areas right at Parmenter too,
Yeah.
if they were to redevelop.
So maybe the minimum height of 2 stories or is really for commercial or mixed use buildings, not or non-single family structures. Maybe we would need we'd want to clarify that.
I just wanted to bring up a tiny point that probably won't matter at all, but with the recommendation of glass, I'm on the sustainability committee, and I know that committee is trying to have it be that buildings don't get to have glass on glass at a corner for bird strike.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's not a hard thing to mitigate, but I just thought, since I heard that on another committee, I would just bring it up.
Yeah. Usually the bird strikes occur on upper floors, not so much on the ground floor. But that's a good
I
point.
can't remember, there's a stat that I found counterintuitive, that they do fly lower, they do hit lower. Like, think of our living room windows and stuff. Because by the time they get going, they're a little bit, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, Katie, I remember it was like maybe like the 2nd and 4th stories, like 2
Yeah.
through 4 were like the biggest issues, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Might have included 1st floor too. I don't quite remember, but I remember 4th floor was like the biggest, and then anything higher than that, usually birds can.
Usually they can clear it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we talk about offset a second? Owning a business on the road, the way that those lots are, where I'm located, the lots are very narrow. So, and there's the slope of the landscaping goes down towards the lake. I could not have a parking lot in the back of my house of my shop. I can only do it in the front, the way that it's laid out. So if we took away some of the front with that mixed road or path, that would take out my parking is my point. The way that they're laid out right now, I mean, the new Napa store, the Zing, the dentist office, the apartments, there's no rules there with the offset. And they're all doing it in a fashion that they can get the most parking, from what I can see. Which also makes sense because we're all very limited on parking. So my point is, every lot on that avenue has a different story. And I think we got to consider, for the people that own those and run those, what those stories are.
I agree, Jeff. But the language that they've suggested here seems to address that. Where we could get parking to the side or to the back, and it's workable, I think that's preferable. But if it doesn't work, like in your situation, right? You just have to show that that it doesn't work. That to me seems to address that
Right. Yeah,
particular issue.
I read that now. Thank you.
Yeah, Daphne, can you scroll down just one page?
Yeah.
I think just so everybody's kind of understanding Jeff's conversation and Randy's talk there, it's about the parking, right? And so I think that's a very good, thanks for bringing that up, Jeff. And yep, we attempted to understand that, this is only for properties upon their redevelopment or upon further study and things like that too. So, but then
Yeah.
as we move forward for the corridor, these should be the, the new guidance language. And Mitch, jump in here if I'm saying something out of turn here. But
Yeah, no, you got it right. So what the initial language that's in the draft of the plan currently is almost identical to what you see in the Parmenter plan design guidelines. It talks about encouraging parking on the side and rear. Where we weren't sure how aggressive the city wanted to be was if the city wanted to require it. And so kind of building off of the comment that Randy had, we tried to put together some language to amend that where it would say you need to put your parking in the side or the rear, but we understand that there are circumstances where that doesn't work. And so we'll allow, or the city will allow parking in the front only to accommodate required parking under the zoning code in those circumstances where you can't fit it in the side and the rear. And so the hope is that would result in a more pedestrian friendly atmosphere, but it also understands that this is still a fairly auto-centric corridor and that businesses want to have parking and need to have parking, but hopefully allow and make it easy for people to actually navigate the corridor by foot, which right now and typically, and what we see in studies is when you have a big parking lot in front, that's not safe nor conducive to people walking. And so we're trying to see that new development is catered a little bit more to multimodal types of transportation.
And I think we kind of doubled down on that theory too. And Jeff, your area, I think we identified that as kind of like a small area plan, not because we're looking to redevelop those couple properties along there, but more along to come up with creative solutions to better fit some of these guidelines. Or in the case of, Jeff decides that he's done with his business, he wants to, be done and sell it off. Then we can consider, what might happen with that property as it redevelops, not only at a single by single case, but maybe in a larger swath of properties as well. So whether that's temporarily holding the position or acquiring the lot and then kind of coming up and letting developers come up with scenarios, or if that's, but I think all of that kind of doubles down in some of the areas along the corridor where we recognize there were unique challenges to just take a deeper look into that. And I think Randy brought that up as we call them small area plans, but I think Randy helped us kind of prioritize some of those areas where those lots were challenging. And Jeff, your area is definitely one of them.
You don't have much lot depth there, Jeff.
I have very little depth there. That's
Yeah,
right.
Right. And they're all that whole block is difficult.
The same way. Well, no, half of the block is that way.
Yeah.
The Doctor's Park and Wells Fargo is different.
Yeah.
Jim's and mine and the Vespa store.
Yeah.
We have about 10 feet behind the building. That's about it.
Yeah.
So, I lost my train of thought. So if we were to put in that multipath right there, it is a problem where across the street, there's plenty of room all the way down, except at the where the strip mall starts, where the Murphy's Pizza was and all that stuff. There you don't have a terrace again. So I can one property at a time is a real important wordage there. So I do like that a lot. That is wonderful. Thank you. I think there should be an applause too for the Napa store versus the dead Sonic, and the dentist office instead of the dead Jiffy Lube, and even the apartment building, which I'm not fond of, but instead of the dead Mikasina. All three of those are great developments. As a property owner, I love seeing that because those have all been dead for a long time and it looked blighted. After those are finished, the blight is really hurt. I mean, it is much better looking than it's been in a long time.
I think we're going to see quite a bit of new development on the corridor over the next few years.
And I think with that in mind, the general idea is we're not trying to be over prescriptive, but we're trying to see that new development as it occurs happens consistently, consistent setbacks, consistent parking locations, so that the corridor does continue to grow and allow these other types of transportation modes.
Daphne, can you refresh my memory of how many stories the buildings can be?
I think, I'm not sure how tall we have it currently in our B2 zoning. We have been discussing that in our zoning like rewrite.
Right.
I believe it's 3, Abby, 4. I don't quite remember.
I think right now it's 3. When they put the Kestrel in, I knew that was 3.
Yep. We haven't identified it, but it would likely be 4 at a minimum on University, because we're showing University Avenue as avenue mixed use in the future land use map. And already like the prime urban properties development is 4. So it's likely to get rezoned for at least 4 as long as the property is between Park and Allen. We're not going to be making that as a recommendation west of Park Street.
Okay. So nothing's set in stone yet on how tall. Okay.
Yep.
Can we talk a little bit about the building setbacks? Right now, the plan talks about setback range of 25 to 50 feet. Where does the zoning and I'm interested now, I guess, in terms of east of Park Street. What's the zoning code? Where's that going to land on setbacks?
It's going to be closer, but for whatever reason, the University Avenue corridor plan is measuring from the curb because I know the reason. It's because the terrace widths vary quite a bit, whereas the zoning ordinance will be measured from the front property line. And Mark and Daphne and I, we sort of disagree at this point about what that front minimum setback should be, but it's likely to be 10 to 15 feet. It'll either be 10 or 15. And what we were going based off of is when we did the University Avenue corridor walking tour, there was a lot of support for the workstation building that has been there for decades, and it's just east of Kestrel. But there was concern that Kestrel was a bit close, and there's really the difference there. It's pretty minimal. It's, I think, about 5 feet difference in the front setback. But I think the difference too is the type of landscaping that was used, and also the material on that first story. Kestrel has like zero scaping landscaping, so it sort of looks a little hardscape. It's not planted with grass in the front, and I think that might have an impact on how it's perceived. But also the terrace there is only 1 foot wide.
Yeah.
So that's part of it too, and that's why I think the team at SRF was suggesting that we look at a difference depending on the width of the terrace.
What's the setback right now for Kestrel?
20 feet.
It's 20 feet from the curb.
Yep. Daphne, can you pull up on the report, page 51 of 65? We actually illustrate this in the plan.
Yeah.
And
so-
yeah, go ahead, Mitch.
So we chose in the plan, and I know that this is different than a zoning code would enforce setbacks, but we chose to measure from the curb, as Abby said, because there's significantly different terrace widths along the eastern portion of the corridor, but there's also large differences in the width of the right of way as well. And so what we are trying to achieve from the kind of design aspects is a consistent setback amongst the developments that is conducive to comfortable and safe walking conditions. And so with this being such a high speed and high traffic corridor, typically to try to get a walkable corridor, you'd push the buildings as far forward as you could and have them right up on the walking area. But as Abby said, walking by the Kestrel building, it feels really, really small and kind of scary. And so that's where we thought, slightly larger than that, but understanding, again, kind of going back to the parking conversations, all of these lots have very different existing environments. So having a little bit of a range can potentially address some of the parking issues, but it also addresses some of those difference in terrace widths. So when you have a really wide terrace, 25 feet may be really close to those walking areas where you may want to go further back. And so the whole idea was to try to establish a consistent feel where you can safely navigate the corridor while walking without feeling like you're right on top of the traffic. Yeah, that was a long-winded kind of rambling response, but that's kind of what we were trying to achieve.
Yeah, and I did pull up the draft. Again, this is draft. Our zoning ordinance committee hasn't even seen this yet. But what we're showing most of the University Avenue corridor as east of Park Street is mixed use avenue zoning district, MUA, and we're showing a minimum front setback of 15 feet, although some on our staff would like that to be reduced to 10, and a maximum of 30 feet. And we are also showing principal building height at 65 feet or 5 stories. We're unlikely to see any 5-story buildings or many 5-story buildings because of the building code requirement. When you go above 4 stories, it requires a different method of construction that's more expensive, and also parking will be a challenge. It is possible we would see some where someone's able to assemble some of the smaller lots into like a larger redevelopment area.
Where are you measuring the setback of 15 feet from? You're not measuring that from the curb though, right?
Not from the curb, no, it's from the lot line.
Okay.
Wasn't there
so-
also consideration in the setback being visibility for the cars to pull in and out?
Yes.
Yep, that is part of it too. And we do have an overlaying requirement on corner properties. It's called the visual preference triangle, where we don't allow properties on the corner to impede on that visual triangle for turning movements.
Yeah, that's a great point too, because we don't want the building to be so close that people are having to pull onto the sidewalk in order to see if they can safely turn in. So we want people to be able to stop on the parking or the building side of the sidewalk to be able to look rather than pulling out across, and that's putting pedestrians in danger that way.
Abby, with the avenue mixed use, when you're talking about setbacks, do you think it'd be worthwhile to add a little thing about from the curb because they are so different? Or would that be too complicated for all the different applications?
I don't know if we can do that through the zoning ordinance. I've never seen an ordinance measure from the curb, but we could ask our consultants and see if there's maybe like something additional that could be added in here.
Just wanted to get back to the Kestrel again. So you were saying it was what, 20 feet from the curb?
Yeah.
Yes,
And that would probably, so from the property line, the zoning is gonna call for 15, right?
Right. Minimum.
But I'm guessing the Kestrel must be what, about 10 or 12 feet from the property line?
Yeah, it's probably about that, Jim. It's probably about 12 because we have a 1 foot wide terrace. And then I think that the sidewalk in that location is only 4 feet wide. So you've got 5 feet there of additional right of way. And then we probably have another foot of right of way inside the sidewalk.
Right.
So you're up to 6. So yeah, it's somewhere in there. I could get you the exact. I know we looked it up, but I can't remember off the top of my head what it is.
Because a setback like that, I know somebody mentioned to me that they feel actually claustrophobic walking in front of there. And I think it's probably more perception that if a car jumped the curb, you're going to be able to get out of the way, which is probably certainly not practical. But with you have no place to go. And I think for pedestrians, that is, whether it's reality or just perception, I think it's out there.
Well, I think that's right. So that maybe goes back to Paul's point of, measuring it from the curb. If we have bigger terrace width, you feel like there's a little bit more safety. You don't quite get that claustrophobic feeling. I think in terms of, I was wanting to have the setbacks measured from the right of way just to be consistent with the zoning code. But after our discussion and your reasoning, to me, it seems like it's appropriate to leave this document, setback from the curb. I think that's fine.
Does anybody have any other comments as it relates to setbacks? Again, this was just one of the locations that we, a really easy example, we could see quite a bit of varying differences here. And as Mitch mentioned, as you get to the eastern side of the corridor, I mean, your setbacks and your right-of-way lines and everything, or sorry, not your setbacks, but your right-of-way and your terrace widths are much more variant. So I don't know if there's any other discussion or areas that you want to bring up as far as setback discussion here. So we've kind of talked through the building height piece a little bit. The other items on here are ground floor transparency and kind of the minimum clear glass that needs to be considered, and building materials and signage were kind of the other ones that Randy had identified. I don't know if there's any concerns or priorities that you want to discuss here in the time remaining with this meeting.
I'd like to talk, the ground floor transparency, you're talking for something with mixed use, is that right? Or
That's correct, yes.
and that's, I can't remember where I saw it in here, but it's not for like an apartment building. Would that be true?
It
Or-
wouldn't, that's correct. It wouldn't be for an apartment building.
Okay,
That's correct. So,
It's on page 2 here too, Daphne, if you want to scroll down one more. Or did I get that right? Maybe it's on page 3.
page 3.
There you go. Sorry about that. Yep.
and that makes perfect sense. Yes.
So for just a little bit of reference, so 35% is what's listed in the design guidelines for Parmenter Street and the Parmenter Street plan. As Randy pointed out, Madison in their University Ave plan has identified 60%. And so I think, from SRF's perspective, anywhere in that range makes a lot of sense, but it's going to come down to comfort of the group and the city.
Yeah, pretty easy fix on our end to adjust accordingly, but the guidance is generally in place from the parliamentary plan, as Mitch said. So I guess we would be looking for, are we comfortable with the 35? Do we want to have a differing number in between, or to go up all the way to match what the city has? And it's just more restrictions for developers probably at that point versus striking that balance of what you'd like to see along that corridor.
Does the 60% mean they don't want to go above that, or that's their minimum of 60%, right?
Minimum.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
And that's just for the inviting, right? The openness to try
Right.
to, lure the pedestrians in to their businesses to see what's going on, be having people being able to see out and open up that kind of that feeling of inviting, right? Versus locked in.
Yeah. I think the 35%, honestly, I think the 35% is too low. The 60% is maybe pushing it a little bit. I use that as an example. But, I think we maybe we shoot for 50% or 60%. And again, it's just a guideline.
Mhm.
And if a developer, a building owner proposes something different, and it meets their needs and it meets the city's needs, then it could be, obviously it can be changed or overlooked.
Mhm.
I think also that 50 or 60% might be able to alleviate some of this claustrophobia if you are have a narrow setback.
Mhm.
Again, it's just really perception, but if you can see inside a place, you don't feel closed in.
Good point.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I did just look up the exact setback for Kestrel and it's 10.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'd support the 50%. I mean, if we're heading into Madison and theirs is 60, I can see where we would want to have something higher than 35.
I agree. And I also think that the requirement should be applied to public spaces within apartments, because oftentimes the apartment will have, the workout facility or something like that on the first floor. And it'd be nice to be able to get some transparency on those buildings also.
Yeah, really good point, Abby.
Abby, I love that. What did you say? Public spaces within what?
Within the apartment buildings, like even the
Just
leasing
apartment, yeah.
offices, community rooms, workout rooms, that kind of
Right.
thing.
Right.
Yeah, I like that too.
Yes.
All right, so 50% and then add, in addition to commercial space, public spaces within apartments.
Mhm.
Okay.
So we're kind of to the building materials and the the facades and signage, kind of the two that are remaining here that we haven't discussed. Anybody have a comment on either of the two to get the conversation going? Or preference, or like what Randy has written verbatim?
I
I
like,
gotta-
yes.
Let me read it. Let's see.
Yeah.
It's very small.
Oh, I can blow it up too.
Thank you.
Now,
Viewing the guidelines for continuous sign.
I would have a comment on the signage, not related to the commercial signage, but more to the signage at intersections. that, and I forget where I was that I saw this, but the intersection signs were about twice the height of the current ones that we have. And again, much easier for pedestrians to see and probably also for drivers to see as they're coming up, and they don't have to slam on the brakes and say, oh, here's Park Street.
I totally agree with Jim. I have relatives from Minneapolis, and whenever they come here, they're like, you have the tiniest street signs. Make them bigger.
Randy, the IFAS on upper stories, is that okay? Or are you just talking like, or do you mean in total? I know some buildings put in the solid materials on the bottom, and as the building goes up, they switch over to IFAS.
You know, yeah, for sure on the lower floors, because it just isn't very impact resistant, doesn't take much. On the upper floors, it's just, it is a material that over time kind of needs a lot of maintenance and wear, and it just is not the most durable of materials.
Okay.
So I would just try to discourage it again.
Okay, in general.
In general, I don't see a lot of it used actually anymore.
Well,
but
there's so many better products now.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
they're coming out with them, so that's good. Signage. So we're saying not a lot of monument signs, pole signs, just building mounted as a, well, especially if we're having less setbacks.
if we're trying to get tight setbacks,
Yeah,
it doesn't seem really like we really want to have encourage pole signs and monument signs out
yeah.
there.
The clutter that I don't like the clutter of those signs really, but it's just me.
Now, there's obviously, I don't know what this, I thought we were going to look at the sign code along with the zoning code. Is that happening?
We are, but we aren't starting the sign until the zoning is completed.
I see.
When you have apartment buildings, aren't there a lot of times they want to put for rent or something like that in front, or how do they handle that?
Temporary signage, you mean?
Okay, is it temporary?
Yep.
Okay.
I think if it's under a certain size, it's exempt and it's allowed to be displayed for a certain period of time, but then it has to come down.
Okay.
So Paul, your text is in red here, correct? This.
Yep, our response. Yep.
So
our response is in red, right?
Yeah. So do we not address signage in the design standards, or say signage to be compatible with Middleton ordinances? What do you?
Yeah, so I kind of wrote in here, signage standards are very tricky because they get into freedom of speech issues.
Mm-hmm.
And so the reason why we didn't feel really comfortable going well beyond what had been established in the city of Middleton, like with the Parmenter standards, and especially with an update to the signage code coming in the future, is that you can easily get in tricky areas by adding signage requirements without having proper reviews by legal teams and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would suggest that we kind of carry on what's in Parmenter, knowing that there is precedent within the city of Middleton to do that, or like what Randy indicated, just say it needs to be consistent with Middleton signage codes. And then I think it's better tackled as a part of that full scale update that the city's going to do in the future, where they're going to really dig into their actual standards. I think that's a much safer place to be, and also will allow a more comprehensive look at the code.
Daphne and Abby, what do you guys think?
I think that's a safe way to handle it. We are very familiar with the concerns around the freedom of speech issues with sign codes, and we are working with Vandewall to update that, and they have a couple of people who this is their specialty, and there are legal battles pending, and we don't want to get embroiled in anything like that any further. So I would recommend that you just refer to the sign ordinance.
That sounds good. Okay.
Do we currently have any roof signs? I don't remember seeing any.
Rooftop signage, is that what you said?
Yeah.
It requires a variance under our current sign ordinance. We do have a couple. We have the Middleton Center one, that was the replacement from the old Middleton
Right.
Center building. And then we have a couple that we consider rooftop signs, even though most people don't think of them as that. One example is that little gift shop. I'm not sure if it's still a gift shop or acupuncture.
Oh, I know which one you mean. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the green and purple building on University. That's
Right.
just because of the pitch of the roof, there's nowhere on the facade to put the sign, so they have it
Yeah.
on the roof.
That sign is huge for the building, you know.
Yeah,
And I think the other rooftop signs are more visible from University, not from University, from the Belt Line, which is different than, yeah, I'd like to get away from them, but
yeah.
I see they're
They're not
discouraged.
allowed under our current ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
So if we can come to a consensus here, we could make a recommendation to the Plan Commission to adopt the plan. Is that what we're trying to get to?
Yes, that's ultimately, and then you guys can also add, conditions or, things you'd like to see changed within the plan and all of that.
And then what about, are there other committees that are still yet to see this, or is the Plan Commission then just sends it off to council for adoption?
Yeah, I think it will be to Plan Commission and then council. Ped Bike Transit and Public Works have already taken a look at it. And they were generally very supportive of everything in the plan.
Perfect. Okay, good. I'll start just by recommending, making a motion to recommend approval to the Plan Commission.
Do we want to have the forward-looking statement in there also of the, that in the future? Is that part of the motion?
Yes, that is part of the motion. Thank you.
Yeah, Kathy, let me just recap here for the group here. What I have written down is at the beginning, we want to strike that balance, for understanding that we're responsive to look at what we have today and striking a balance for what a future corridor might look like and saying some language up front. The motion would be contingent on the review of, adding that language plus the majority of Randy's comments incorporated into the plan as we're written here. I think Daphne was making some updates to some of that language. We would then incorporate, contingent on the recommendation, contingent on adding the memo from that Randy had put together, and then Daphne has since amended. That makes sense.
Yeah, let me share that so we can all just take a look at it. And then.
And Mitch, correct me if I'm wrong, most of these are in the appendices themselves, right? Short of the introductory language that I just mentioned.
Yeah.
Then it really gets back into the appendices B.
Yes. So yeah, so everything on the screen right now is is an appendix B. The only other item that I had that Paul didn't mention was potentially adding a line on page 38 or 39, which is the signalized crossings regulation recommendation about adding or including audio crossing as a part of the menu of items that the city can
Mhm.
use to help improve
Mhm.
safety.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you
Um,
for that, Mitch. I have that written down too. Yeah, blinking and audio at page 38 there on the menu.
So it'd be everything here plus those two items that are in the actual bulk of the plan.
And we could probably take a shot at that paragraph, that introductory paragraph shortly after the meeting here. And send that out, for review, if that's something, that's probably the only spot that you'd want to maybe take another look at. If you're comfortable with the language that Randy had put together here, and you trust that we can add something to a table, on page 38. I don't think it would need a further review after this at all.
And I think as far as that introductory language, I think you could work with Daphne and Abby. I don't know that the committee needs to see it again, unless other people feel that way.
Right, and Randy, you'll review it when, as part of plan again, so you'll
Yes,
have a,
correct,
yeah.
yeah. Mhm.
I agree. I don't think we need to review it again, and I think that if it goes to plan and then,
I think the other spot where we make a quick change on this is we would add these meetings onto the overall schedule as well. I don't recall what page that's on, but we had talked about our process, documenting this process. I think this is now the fourth time that this group has assembled here. So making sure that you get your due credit for that as well, and part of that process. I'm trying to find that page, but yep, that's just a minor thing to add. And then
And
the new
then-
date, and then the new dates for the plan commission and council as well.
And then the last thing, sorry to keep adding to the list, is to get rid of the
Short for it.
existing sign guidelines and just reference city code, which isn't on that list. So that'd be the last thing.
Okay, so is all of that included in your motion then, Randy?
Well,
You wanna try again, Randy?
I'm gonna try again. I'm gonna, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna make a motion that we recommend Plan Commission approve the plan with the amendments as discussed and outlined just now.
Great.
I will second that. Or Katie, if you want to.
No, go for it, Kathy.
Okay.
Okay, then I guess we can take a vote. Everyone who, I don't know what the actual, I don't know how to actually say it.
All in favor?
Yeah, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, so the motion passes.
Randy, just, and this is probably for Abby and Daphne too. So as we make the changes, we'll definitely get new copies and everything circulated. For the plan commission agenda, I don't anticipate having to do another presentation or anything like that. Would it be helpful to provide a track changes version for you as well? Or Randy, how would you guys like to see this as part of plan commission? Kind of document our changes and recommendations.
I don't know. Honestly, the plan commission didn't get into the heart of the plan really. So, I mean, you could document the changes just so that it's there and they know it. I don't know that that will even be pertinent to them, actually. But yeah, we'll see.
I feel like for plan commission, the biggest portion might be that first paragraph that you guys add,
Yeah,
talk about that future vision of it.
yeah,
Since that was like, the main holdup at plan commission. So
yeah,
Right.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think we got to get that right. If we get that right, then I think we'll be in good shape.
Excellent. And remind me again, Daphne, the date of that meeting.
so we can put you guys on our next plan commission meeting, which is April 26th. So the last week of April. So if you guys can get me like that, just probably that first paragraph done by next week, we can put it in the packet and everything. So,
I would imagine we'll get that to you yet this week,
okay,
Yeah,
great.
today or tomorrow at the latest, and start circulating through and making sure that city staff is comfortable with what we put in there, and we'll put it across to the Plan Commission on the 26th. And thank you guys for taking the time to meet again, and great discussion, great feedback throughout this whole process. So thanks again for all your dedication and time.
Thank you for all your efforts, Paul.
Yes, thank you, Paul.
Yeah.
Do we need to adjourn? I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll
Okay.
second it.
Who seconded? Sorry.
Jim.
Jim.
Okay. All right.
All right.
Thanks. Or
Right.
all in favor?
Aye.
Bye.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Yep,
Thanks,
bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye.
You too. Bye.